So we're going to start off with Hassan al-Banna, who is the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. He was born in 1906. He's Egyptian, just north of Cairo in a village. He studied at the Darul Uloom. In order to become a teacher, they had state institutions that would train teachers, and then he went to college in Cairo, etc. He was posted in a small town called Ismailia, which is a city in the Suez Canal zone, and he was repulsed by what he saw in that city. He thought that materialism and secularism has come to dominate, and he decided that he's going to fight against it. His own writing tells us that a group of workers came to him and said to him to help him, etc. So he decided to create the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in 1928. Ikhwan al-Muslimin just means Muslim Brotherhood. He was a tireless organizer. So he established many Islamic schools, sustenance for orphans, needy, the sick, clinics, bringing electricity to villages, and so on and so forth. At first, his main work was for welfare, and that allowed him to create a base of supporters for the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. This is a time when Britain had colonized Egypt, which of course had occurred in 1882, much earlier, when the British, French and Egyptians had built the Suez Canal. Now, to protect the Suez Canal, the British had also stationed troops in Egypt and effectively had colonized Egypt. In 1914, though, Egypt was made a British protectorate. So it wasn't a colony anymore, but a protectorate. The difference, of course, is that in a protectorate, the Egyptians have certain rights within their own government, etc. But foreign policy, defense, and other crucial aspects of internal governance are still controlled by the British. So British were principally interested in safeguarding the Suez Canal. That was their main thing. And Egypt's ties in 1914 were cut with the Ottoman Empire. Egypt was basically part of the Ottoman Empire, but now the British have separated it from the Ottoman Empire. And in fact, post-Second World War, as you may already know, the British had the intention of carving up the whole of the Ottoman Empire, which is why they also supported the movement of the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia and in Arabia to liberate Arabs from Ottomans and to bring them under the control of the British. At this time, a major political party emerged called the Wafd Party. Wafd means delegation, bhai wahan pe wafd leke gaya main, etc. And they emerged, they were a secular nationalist Egyptian political party. In 1919, they organized a nationwide revolution in Egypt against British colonial rule. And although the immediate movement was crushed, Britain soon realized that they would not be able to hold on to power because the Wafd was incredibly popular. Very popular. If you are curious as to why Egyptians developed or how Egyptians developed a secular nationalist sort of political party, the answer of course is that Muhammad Ali, who was one of the rulers of Egypt, had already undertaken many campaigns for the modernization of Egypt, for its educational modernization and so on. So much of the intelligentsia of Egypt was already very modernist in that sense. Now, so in 1922, they did give Egypt formal independence, although they continued to maintain a lot of influence in Egypt, especially mainly because of the Suez Canal. In 1923, the Wafd created the first constitution and created a constitutional monarchy. So Egypt had a king. The king's name was Farouk I, but they said the king will be constrained now by a democratically elected constitution, much like Britain is a constitutional monarchy. The leader of the Wafd Party was Saad Zaghlul, and he became the first prime minister from 1924 to 25, etc. He was very popular, of course, because he was the main leader who had liberated Egypt, etc. Now, power in Egypt belonged basically to three different groups, you could say. Number one was the Wafd, which was the most popular party. Number two was King Farouk himself. And number three, of course, the British are still very much there and in charge. The British felt that the major threat to their interests, which was again the Suez Canal, was from the Wafd Party. They felt that the Wafd Party would nationalize the Suez Canal, and they were terrified of it. And they were doing their best to make sure that the Wafd does not move in that direction and damage British economic interests in any way. And for this purpose, they recruited the king in this particular way and tried to neutralize the Wafd. In 1936, there was an Arab revolt in Palestine. Palestinian history and Egyptian history are very closely interlinked because, as you may already know, Gaza just borders Egypt. In fact, much of the Palestinian movement was started from Egypt, including the formation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So Palestinian movement, Egyptians, and also of course West Bank, very, very close. In 36, there was a big revolt in Palestine against the Zionist immigration which had sped up. Why was Zionist immigration now so fast and becoming faster and faster? Mainly because of the rise of fascism in Europe, which was, especially in Germany, which, as you know, was very, very anti-Semitic. So lots and lots of Jews were leaving Europe and coming to Palestine, and the British was supporting this, etc. Now this revolt was crushed by the British, but the revolt nonetheless lasted 3 years and transformed into a guerrilla war and into armed struggle and all sorts of other things, etc. And this is also the period where the Ikhwan al-Muslimin was now able to expand into Egypt. By the 1940s, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin had nearly 1 million members in Egypt, and they also had members, of course, in Palestine and in many other parts of the Arab world. It had become a very important political party. Now, Egypt had Maher Pasha as the 6th Prime Minister of the country this is 1944 to 1945. As you already know, the world is in World War II at this point in time. He was the head of the Saadist institutional party. This, of course, is a reference to Saad Zaghloul, who was the first Prime Minister. This was basically a splinter from the Wafd Party. The Wafd Party, ideologically, it was the same as the Wafd Party. No major difference. Their disagreements were over, issues of organization and so on. So he is in power, and he declares war against the Axis powers. He declares that Egypt will fight against fascism. And just as he declares that, immediately after his announcement that he's going to fight against fascism, they're going to fight against the German Nazis and so on and so forth, and they're going to join all the progressive forces of that time. In World War II, he is assassinated by a 26-year-old Egyptian lawyer named Mahmoud Asawi, who turns out to be a member of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. So there's a big trial. Everybody finds out, yes, it's the Ikhwan al-Muslimin that assassinates the Prime Minister of Egypt, or rather right after he says that we're going to fight Nazi Germany. After him comes Mahmoud Fahmi el-Nokrashi Pasha, who is the next Prime Minister, the 7th one. Now by 48, Egypt is fighting another war, and that war, of course, is the First Arab-Israeli War. On May 1st, 1948, Israel declares that they're going to be an independent country, and 7 different Arab countries attack Israel to prevent Israel from becoming an independent country, because that's, of course, Arab and Palestinian land. And interestingly, at that point in time, the British are somewhat supporting the Arabs in that First Arab-Israeli War, because the Zionists actually wanted the British out of Palestine, because the British are in control of Palestine, not the Arabs, etc. Anyway, so in the midst of this war, there are rumors that the Ikhwan was preparing for a coup against the government, and Nokrashi Pasha therefore banned the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. As soon as he banned the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, less than a week later, he himself is assassinated. The next Prime Minister, therefore, Ibrahim Abdul Hadi Pasha, sends a person to assassinate Hassan al-Banna, whom they hold responsible for the assassination of 2 Prime Ministers of Egypt, etc. And he is therefore assassinated in February 1949. The Wafd Party itself now dissolves in 52 when the Egyptian Revolution of 1952 occurs, which we will cover in another class. But the important thing to understand about the 52 Egyptian Revolution is that it's against King Farouk, number 1, and it's also against the British, number 2. And they expel both King Farouk and the British, and they nationalize the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal becomes Egyptian property, but they have to fight another war. In fact, 2 wars they have to fight. In fact, 3 wars they have to fight. They're fighting till 1973 until the Western powers say, okay, you get to keep the canal, etc. The long drawn out conflict occurs then. And if you are interested in examining or understanding how the Ikhwan was, by focusing mainly on secularism, its main focus was to attack the Wafd. They were not attacking so much the king, the monarchy, etc. They were not attacking Britain and its interests in Egypt or talking about the Suez Canal as such. Their main issue was secularism. And the main big political party that was secular was the Wafd Party. So their main line of attack, criticism, was actually against the Wafd. The British saw this as a great opportunity to divide and conquer and rule, etc. And so they would allow the Ikhwan al-Muslimin to continue to attack the Wafd, because their perception, and not incorrectly, was that the main danger to British rule is not the Ikhwan, but is the Wafd Party. Further readings, if you want to find out more about this, here are a set of 5 books that you can look at to understand this relationship between how the British maneuvered in such a way to get the Ikhwan to basically attack the Wafd, which was the main threat to them. In this context then, Hassan al-Banna, before his assassination, writes a letter to King Farooq, whom you see over here, in 47. And in this is a very important letter, and this is the letter that is in your course as well, that it's a long letter. Al-Banna never really as such wrote a book, but he wrote lots and lots of letters which are published as the letters of Hassan al-Banna. And this is one of the most important ones because it's in 47 when all this crisis is occurring. The Arab-Israeli war is going to take place. World War II is over, and so on. He says there are 2 parts: the way of Islam, its fundamental assumption, its principle, its culture and civilization. The second is the way of the West, and the Western civilization is bankrupt and in decline. Only Islam can provide all the answers. Now, if you examine his argument, you'll see that he references the Quran on everything. So I'm not going to read all the Quranic references out to you. You can do that. You should do that on your own. But I have put them up here for you as a reference, etc. Firstly, he says only Islam can provide hope, and then he quotes the Quran, etc. Islam can create national greatness, and then he quotes various verses of the Quran. Islam can create a strong army. Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's Nazism and Stalin's communism are all based on pure militarism, which I think you should know if you study fascism as well as communism. I think you should know that's not correct, right? They did have strong militaries, but they're not based on militarism as such. They have their own, populist mass base and the rest of it. He says Islam can build public health, and he quotes the Quran as well as several hadith. Here, Islam will lead to science, etc. Again, he quotes the Quran. And Quran does not, he says, distinguish between secular and religious science, but advocates both, that we should study both. Similarly, he continues, only Islam can provide the morality of the modern age. He says Islam provides all the fundamental principles of economic affairs. He quotes the Quran. Again, Islam provides the most perfect and most beneficial institutions known to mankind. Islam protects minorities, and Islam is not a disturbing influence on relations with the West, which of course means Britain over here. As you can see from this particular summary of his letter, his main emphasis is really to quote the Quran and to say this is what we can get from our own religion and so on, and that's what you need to do. On the Western Renaissance, he writes, amongst the causes which have impelled some of the Eastern nations to deviate from Islam and to choose to imitate the West was the study of Western Renaissance made by their leaders and their conviction that it was accomplished only by overthrowing religion. Basically, his idea is that since in Europe, Europeans have progressed by overthrowing religion, therefore Muslims also wrongly perceive that if we also move towards secularism, materialism, science, rationality, we will also progress. He says, but the nature of Islamic doctrine is quite unlike that of any other religion. In other words, in Europe they needed to overthrow Christianity because it was getting horrible. He's not saying that was bad as such. He's saying, yeah, they needed to do that. But we don't need to do that because we are different and Islam is different. He says if one of the excuses adopted by some of those who follow the path of the Westerners was that they had begun to be aware of the course taken by the Muslim religious authorities in view of their hostile attitude towards nationalist revival. Yani ki is conceding over here that yes, the clergy, the ulama of Egypt have taken a hostile attitude towards the Wafd Party and towards Egyptian nationalism. I concede that. But he says if this is true, to some extent he's saying is not necessarily true, but this was a flaw within the religious establishment itself, not in the faith as such. So they may have done that, but that's not the fault of Islam. That's just the fault of the ulama themselves. Then he says, you see, luxuries annihilate nations. Again, you see the benefit of looking at medieval Islamic discourse, and you see the connection now. This is somebody in the 20th century writing exactly what I taught you was from the 10th century and from the 9th century and so on. He says, luxuries only annihilate nations, and its comforts and coveted possessions have only convulsed Europe. Wealth corrupts, and he gives references in the Quran, etc. We need to have a practical reform. So then he gives you a whole manifesto and agenda. No, he doesn't give it to you, actually, he gives it to the king. So what is it? He says, end to party rivalry. What are the parties? Basically, the Wafd Party here. Na? So end the parties, etc. basically, in fact, in this period in time, although the Ikhwan al-Muslimin was organized as a political party, but their view was that political parties is a Western institution within the democratic parliamentary system, and that Islam has nothing to do with it, and you might as well do away with it. Later on, their view on this changes. They bring Islamic law, strengthen the armed forces, there should be a bond between Islamic countries, Islamization of all departments, the surveillance, I love this one, the surveillance of the personal conduct of all government employees, and an end to the dichotomy between the private and professional spheres. So we're going to surveil every single government officer and make him find out what he's doing. Setting the hours of work in summer and winter ahead so that they will be easy to fulfill religious duties, and to bribery, all aspects of government must be weighed on the scale of Islamic wisdom, employment from Al-Azhar University in the military and bureaucracy. On the social and educational policy, he says conditioning of people to respect public morality, women's lives must be in accordance with Islam, we must end prostitution, gambling, drinking, on ostentation in dress. He's talking to King Farouk, who looked like that, right? King Farouk, by the way, loved his cars and loved his luxury and loved his clothes, and the Westerners used to write about him that he's very dapper, he's very well dressed, etc. A review of the curricula offered to girls and the necessity of making them distinct from the boys' curricula in many of the stages of education. So girls, you get to study something quite different, boys will study something quite different, etc. Segregation of male and female students, private meetings between men and women, unless within the permitted degrees of a relationship, to be counted as a crime for which both will be censured. So if I have a meeting with my teaching assistant, etc., that is criminal in his view. Encouragement of marriage and procreation, closed ballrooms, dance halls, theaters, cinemas, censor songs, etc., confiscation of provocative stories, supervision of summer vacations. If you're going on a summer vacation, government is going to supervise if whether or not you're having a good time. Regulation, no, that's not it. But anyway, regulation of business hours of cafes, utilization of cafes for teaching illiterates. Why cafes? Because cafes were places where people would come and sit and smoke the hookah and so on and so forth. So he wants that culture also to be stamped out. A campaign against harmful customs at weddings, funeral, births, the zar, civil and religious holidays. So there are many other traditions, part of Sufi Islam, etc. He says कि इनको सबको खत्म किया जाए. Zar, by the way, means kind of the practice where some people would say that they can do magical things and so on and so forth. Astrology and so on. What about social and education policy? He said we have to have moral censorship, moral policing, which I know LUMS students absolutely love. This means anybody who breaks the Ramadan or neglects their prayers, we have to have a police that makes sure that, that cannot be done. Everybody has to say their prayers, all 5 of them, and keep all their rozas, or at least they cannot eat in public, etc. You cannot insult, of course, the faith or any such act. Annexation of the elementary school to the mosque. Religious instruction as a subject in all schools and memorization of the Quran. So he wants that the mosque should control the school, because school becomes a domain of secular education, and he says, no, that's not good, etc. Firm education policy, Arabic language instruction only. Uniform dress code for the entire nation. Yes, all the men will wear one kind of clothes and women will wear another kind of clothes, etc. and so on. And an end to all foreign spirit in language, manners, dress, governesses, nurses, etc. ये जो सारा रखा हुआ है, paraphernalia. Give journalism a proper orientation so that they don't say anything against the king and so on. And improve public health and attention given to village problems. Here is his economic program. Zakat, prohibition of usury, encouragement of economic projects, the protection of the masses from the oppression of monopolistic companies, keeping these within strict limits, etc. Raising the salaries of junior civil servants, reduction in the number of government posts, agricultural and industrial counseling, concern for the technical and social problems of the worker, exploitation of natural resources, and priority given to necessary items rather than to luxury items. Okay? That's his entire economic program, political program, as well as social program, etc. Now, here, after presenting it very briefly and very quickly, hopefully you've done the reading yourself, What are some of my criticisms or conclusions? Well, firstly, if you notice, Hassan al-Banna's argument is largely theological. It's not an argument in the same way as you do a social scientific sort of analysis. You'll see that some of that is going to change actually as more and more people enter the religious fundamentalist or Islamist movement or whatever, political Islam, whatever name you want to give it, or even Ikhwan al-Muslimin, who have actually studied at universities like the University of Cairo. As they enter, their analysis also begins to reflect the new ideas that they're learning, etc. So, and it's also very much in line with what we would consider to be ideas that were, from the medieval period, etc. He is appealing to the king, but that's, I think, a small matter. The bigger matter is that he is appealing to the king in 1948, 47, 48. What is going on in politics at that time? A time when the king and Britain were strongly allied against the Wafd Party. Okay, so the politics of the time is what? There are three powers: the king, the Brits, and the Wafd. And the Brits and the king have already come very close to each other. In fact, in 48, there was a big accusation that the king had become an agent of the British. It was not altogether incorrect, by the way. During the war, his conduct and so on was such that the army turned against the king because they said, this is the guy who's betrayed us. He's become purely a British agent. There are a couple of very important incidents that occur which turn the public against the king, etc. In 1952, in fact, there is a revolution against the king. The kingdom, Egypt ke andar, monarchy is finished in just 2-3 years later, etc., as you can see. So what is Hassan al-Banna doing? He is saying Ikhwan al-Muslimin and the king will have an alliance. Who is the alliance going to be aimed against? It's no secret who it's aimed against. It's against the Wafd, because the king is very afraid that the Wafd is going to unseat the king, which it did want to do. There is also a glaring absence of criticism of the, one of the main issues of Egypt, which is of course the Suez Canal and the stranglehold that Britain has over Egypt's political economy. Did you notice, you read the whole program, did you ever see any word against the Brits? Okay, by that canal should belong to us, do something about that. Nothing. So this is a very clear indication of what the politics really is. We tend to get very lost in the itchy-bitchy detail. Oh my God, he's going to make us wear the same clothes and he's going to ban music. Yes, he's going to do those things. But what is the bigger picture here? The bigger picture, of course, is that this is an alliance between Ikhwan al-Muslimin. A call for an alliance between Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the king, and Britain. And finally, a hand of friendship to the king is against the anti-monarchist and anti-British sentiment, but it is using the label of Islamization. Ikhwan will effectively support any kind of coup undertaken by the king against the Wafd, which had a high likelihood at this point in time, and which is exactly what causes the conflict with the Wafd and the Wafd with the assassination of their prime ministers, etc., 2 of their prime ministers, etc. This feels like the coup is definitely going to happen. And this letter to the king solidifies the idea in the context of Egypt. They're ready for a coup. The king is going to do it with the help of the Ikhwan, overthrow the Wafd, etc., with the help of the British, and the whole democratic experiment, constitutional experiment, and the 1919 Egyptian revolution is going to come to an end. Okay? In the 20th century, Egypt has 2 revolutions. 1919 is the first one, and 1952 is the second one.